My name is Bob Liff, and this is the CUNY Forum, a monthly town meeting that brings prominent New Yorkers together with faculty and students of the Edward T. Rogowski Internship Program in Government and Public Affairs. Democrats across the country celebrated after last month's elections, holding on to the U.S. Senate, almost keeping their small majority in the House, and picking up control of state legislative chambers from Republicans. In New York, not so much. Republicans made major inroads into our solidly Democratic state and city, picking up 4 congressional seats and a bunch of state Senate and Assembly seats, especially in Long Island and across southern Brooklyn. Veteran Democratic Assembly members with decades of experience in Brooklyn were swept out of office, and Republicans took back Long Island legislative and congressional seats that had seemed safe for Democrats. Republicans pointed to weariness and wariness over crime as Republican gubernatorial candidate Lee Zeldin, backed by millions of dollars of so-called independent spending by the likes of Ronald Lauder, relentlessly portrayed a city out of control when it comes to crime, even if statistics did not bear that out. Democrats, as is their wont, formed a firing squad in a circle and blamed, depending on who was doing the blaming, the state Democratic Party, the Brooklyn Democratic Party, Mayor Adams, redistricting, Governor Hochul, the New York Post, candidates themselves, and assorted other players. Many, though not all, Democrats did not blame the messaging around crime that Republicans rode to their strong showing. Perception became a political reality, even if Democrats are reluctant to confront it. It's important to note that despite the Sturm und Drang, Democrats retained huge majorities in the state legislature and saw Hochul reelected comfortably. But there is a reason New York was an outlier, as national Democrats fared better than any ruling party in midterm election in decades. Why that is the focus of our discussion today with 4 New Yorkers who are part of our political universe, whether as elected officials, observers, or analysts. Eddie Gibbs is a Democratic Assemblyman from East Harlem. Ina Vernikov is a Republican city councilwoman from southern Brooklyn. Bradley Honan is the head of the political polling firm Honan Strategies, and Ben Max is the editor of the Gotham Gazette, one of the city's premier online civic and political publications, who will tell us what it all means. Ina, this seems to be the closest we've had to a Republican moment in New York City, so I'm going to give you the first word. What was different this year than we've seen in recent years? Why did Republicans do so disproportionately well, considering how much Donald Trump, for example, was a drag on Republicans across the country?
Well, let's start by talking about my district, right? And my race for city council last year, which, a lot of people, Democrats, pundits, the establishment expected the Democrat to win. And, I kind of did, not just me, but my team and everyone who worked on my campaign, kind of did the impossible, right? We blew it out of the water. We took the seat in a landslide. We turned over a seat that was a Democrat for over 100 years and turned it into a Republican seat. And I think that, look, a part of it is demographics. We have, in my district, a large demographic that consists of immigrants from the former Soviet Union, and we have a lot of Asian American immigrants, and they are sick and tired of the Democratic Party and what it's been doing to our country, our city. And so we're seeing this rise and just anger. And anger is, I think, what drives people to come out to vote. And I think that's what happened in my election, and I think more so now. And you see that Congressman Zeldin got 75% of the vote in my district.
Let me, Eddie, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party has been ascendant in recent years, and it was largely centered around criminal justice issues.
Correct.
And is there a message that you take back to Albany from this election? Governor Hochul has tried to straddle this issue politically for ever since she's been in office.
But public safety is on everybody's mind. Crime is at season. So when you have these particular issues and concerns with constituents, you have to address them. And I think the governor, for the most part, she did just that. But, when the Republican repetitively, repeat on TV, crime is high, we don't care, Democrats don't care, we're giving away the city, the mayor's opening up the door to jails. Well, it creates a heightened sense of insecurities. And, voters and constituents all alike are like, hey, we are concerned, we are afraid. And what I think the Democrats did wrong was we didn't aggressively address that we are aggressive on crime. We do care about public safety. We do care about our parents and our siblings traveling on subways and coming home safely. It wasn't enough of that going around, that messaging. With the Republicans, they kept repeating it over and over. Crime is bad. You heard Congressmember Zeldin repeat that every commercial. Crime is bad. I won't let you down. I'm going to arrest everybody. Let's kick Alvin Bragg out of office.
Yeah,
so they created
yeah,
that,
right.
yes, it created that insecurity amongst voters that may perhaps had individuals believe that we didn't care about crime.
Bradley, you had a piece in Empire Report. Was that
City and State?
Oh, it was in City and State. I apologize. And in which you kind of surveyed your fellow wizards, your fellow political consultants and pollsters, et cetera, et cetera. And the question is, because on a national level, I mean, Ina was talking about how the national Republican message was resonating here, which goes against the idea that all politics is local. But politics has been nationalized. So the question becomes, in looking at what happened in the last election, is it sustainable for the Republicans? Is it a one-shot? Is it a unique confluence of factors that led to this Republican resurgence in the face of Democrats doing so well or holding on so well in the rest of the country?
It's a very good question, Bob, and I don't know. I think the jury is out on that question. I think what I am hearing right now is almost a deafening chorus across the country, less so in New York, from Democrats who are popping champagne corks about how well we did nationally, which we did do well, and we held back a Republican wave. Obviously, a very different story, as you said, here in New York. I think there are significant underlying problems, demographics and geographics, that suggest that the Democrats need to do a lot more soul searching than I hear that they're doing. I mean, if you look at some of the defection that took place in the Democratic Party among Democratic voters who voted for the Republicans, that's a very serious issue. There was an enormous drop-off in votes cast by New York City voters, and those that did voted overwhelmingly Republican in ways that they haven't for almost 30 years. Look at the black community. It moved pretty significantly in the direction of the GOP. Zeldin won almost 20% of the blacks. He won a third of the Latinos. Unless Democrats are willing to confront these conversations, and as the councilwoman said and as the assembly member said, unless Democrats go to where the voters are and empathize with them, which I think is Politics 101, that says, we hear you on issues of crime, on criminal justice, on the economy. I think Democrats are not willing to do that, and if they're not, I think it's very problematic for the future.
Ben, Samar Khushid had a very interesting story. It's actually ran the day that we're taping this, about Ewen Chu, is a Chinese American, a newly elected state senator who withstood the Republican wave in a southwestern southern Brooklyn district. And one of the reasons that he was pointing to was, in fact, identity politics, that she ran significantly ahead of other Democrats when you consider who they voted for governor, who they voted for in very neighboring districts where there was not a Chinese American candidate. So, I mean, we're used to, in analyzing politics, looking at identity as kind of a defining demographic reason for why people vote. What happened there? I mean, because I think that one of his points is that you have significantly, as Ina was saying, Asian American voters in some of those other districts where there was not an Asian American candidate voted much more Republican than they had.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case study because it's a brand new state Senate district, no incumbent running, and you had...
It's an Asian American plurality district,
yes,
not a majority, a plurality
right,
district.
but close to majority,
Yes.
and this is coming out of the census where showing Asian Americans the fastest growing demographic group in New York City. So you have new districts drawn, this new state Senate district, there'll be a new city council district as well that's supposed to be a quote unquote Asian opportunity district in Brooklyn coming up in next year's elections. And just quickly to some of the points already raised, as of right now, you would expect the trends we've seen over these last couple of elections to continue in those city council elections coming up next year, unless Democrats figure out some different ways of messaging and talking to voters, and quite possibly some different policies as well. In this state Senate district that we're talking about in Brooklyn, in the 17th district, you have a very interesting dynamic which occurred in some other districts as well, Assemblymember Ron Kim in Queens, where you have Asian American candidates barely winning what are supposed to be sort of Asian opportunity districts, having to outrun the top of the ticket by significant margins. And that's what happened.
Meaning Governor Hochul.
Meaning Governor Hochul, where Lee Zeldin won these districts by wide margins, as Councilmember Vernikoff was talking about in her neck of the woods, which is nearby the district we're talking about here, and having to outrun, where you get a mix of identity politics and then the issues that voters are concerned with, whether it's education, crime, and so forth. So she was able to figure out that coalition that was based on identity as well as policy, and
Well, it was also
got
the
to the
fact-
finish line.
It was also the fact, in the case of Senator-elect Chu, she had a long history in the district. She was, she's not, most of these candidates who run do not emerge, full grown from the head of Zeus. I mean, these are people who have worked in communities. She worked for a state assembly member. She was a member of the community board. She worked for Justin Brannan, the city council member down there. I mean, these are, in most cases, people who put a lot of work into their communities. I mean, I don't know, whoever wants to jump in.
I'll jump in.
I would just very quickly add to what I was saying. That's not all. It was the case a bit with the Republican candidate in this race, but on the Republican side, we're not always seeing that. We're seeing, for example, a Republican who defeated a Democratic Assembly member who may not even have been living in the district. So we see in these elections that there definitely are localized factors and things like that matter. But then we're also seeing these bigger trends where voters are clearly going into the voting booth and voting party all the way based on factors that are very outside of the specific candidates in some instances.
I think that for the Asian American community right now, the issues are overriding the identity politics. And I think the problem for the Democrats is that they are a little bit out of touch with the people and with the Asian American community on issues. Crime and education are the top two issues for Asian Americans right now. And the Democrats are not addressing those issues for them. And if, they're becoming more and more aligned with the Republican Party. We are, addressing crime in a way that they like to see the politicians address it, and we are addressing the education issue the way that they would like to see it. Merit-based education, specialized high schools, these are all things that Democrat politicians are trying to get rid of right now.
Well,
that
actually,
is hurting the Asian community.
Not the governor, not the mayor. These are, sometimes these are talking points more than they are facts on the ground. I mean, to some degree, let me jump at,
I agree with her. Democrats, we have to work harder at messaging, right? Our constituents, our base is afraid. And, we need more Democrats to come out there and just deliver that message that we are safe. We do care about crime. We do care about public safety. And you mentioned, Bob, Politics 101. Well, our mayor is doing just that. He's on the ground. He's going into these communities. He's talking to voters. He's trying to determine what can we do to make this city safe, right? So we're doing all these great things, but it's in messaging. We're not getting that message out. It seems like we.
But also, as a Democrat, you know this better than the rest of us, is you have a progressive wing of the Democratic Party that's trying to drag the party to the left. I mean, I believe that one of the reasons Eric Adams was elected in a ranked choice voting election, so it wasn't a first past the post election, is that where a lot of people point out that it's communities of color that are disproportionately the victims of unfair policing. And Eric Adams understood that it's also those same communities that are disproportionately the victims of crime. And that instead of talking about those communities, he went and talked to them. Does that make sense to you?
It makes a whole lot of sense. And again, the mayor is an on-ground mayor, right? So, you got to live it to to legislate, you have to be there and understand, right? So the mayor says, hey, look, we want to go into the subway. We want to make sure that the subway is safe. We want to make sure that all riders are safe, right? And so we go down and we have these press conferences, and it ends there. We needed the governor to come in and say, hey, look, we want to emphasize safety throughout the city and state. When Zeldin released those commercials, I was about to vote for him because I felt like this man's going to protect me and my family. And if you listen to the commercials, you see that, you know, when he brought in his daughters and his wives and the neighbors, it had that effect. Like, now is the time to allow the Republicans to come in and make the city safe again. And it was a perception.
Bradley, Councilwoman Vernikoff in her opening talked about these broader themes, broader Republican themes, and a lot of those are nationalized themes. I mean, you know, we've seen with the, you know, politics has changed to become more nationalized as we've lost local newspapers, as we've lost, you know, I mean, we used to have 7 newspapers when I was a kid in New York City, and they all agreed on the same facts, and then we could fight over them. And now with technological changes and the death of newspapers, everybody kind of retreats to their ideological echo chamber, and we don't even agree on the same facts. And to the degree that the election was nationalized, plays out at a local level. I mean, the 800-pound gorilla in the room, which is Donald Trump, you know, figured heavily across the country and basically stymieing what should have been by all, you know, should have been a Republican resurgence. But that was not the case here. Does that make sense, or it doesn't?
It does, and I think what you're pointing to, Bob, is an important part of this discussion that I don't think is getting enough airtime. There are a confluence of significant, really significant factors that have influenced politics nationally and certainly here in New York State. Let's just tick a few of them off. Donald Trump, pandemic, rising crime, social media, changing, falling apart of the American dream. And this isn't, as you know, a sleepy, content state. Politics here is competitive, it's dynamic, and it's ever changing. And I think the Democratic Party, of which I'm a member of, got a little bit complacent going into this election. I mean, we can talk about some of the issue work, but there was a pretty significant misreading of what was on the minds of the electorate. The exit polls, which were done by AP, which 3,000 voters across the state, suggested that 7 out of 10 voters were not concerned about ballots being stolen. Millions and millions of dollars of Democratic money went down that rat hole. The majority of Kathy Hochul voters did not mention abortion as the leading issue. The number was 13%. 13% of Kathy Hochul's voters said abortion was the leading issue. But she put $30 million behind advertising on that issue. And I think it created a big, big gap. And I thought Zeldin ran a good, but not necessarily great campaign. I think it gave him a big, big opportunity to begin to talk to voters, meet them where they were in a way that I think Democrats were too complacent to do.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think Governor Hochul came into office fairly unknown as lieutenant governor. She had a very short time before her primary and the general election and didn't do what Assemblymember Gibbs was saying. She didn't get into communities in a way where she really campaigned. I mean, she ran a very sort of Rose Garden campaign, lots of TV ads, and very little on-the-ground campaigning. And on the issue of crime and public safety, there was a very clear challenge of trying to find the right balance between saying things are not quite as bad as Lee Zeldin is saying they are, but they're also bad because crime has been rising for 2 years, and here's what I'm doing about it. It was just this either not addressing it or sort of trying to dance around it or saying, oh, it's a perception issue. There was a real challenge of finding a direct
And you also
message on
had,
that.
frankly, as an old tabloid reporter, you had the New York Post basically turning itself into an adjunct of the Zeldin campaign.
That may be the case, but at the same time, there was no concerted collective effort to respond to that. The major figures in the Democratic Party, even beyond Hochul, were not actively campaigning. Senator Schumer ran a very similar campaign. Attorney General Letitia James ran a very similar campaign of very little on-the-ground campaigning. You had state legislative leaders who didn't get seemingly pulled into the election. And then you had Mayor Adams sort of supporting Lee Zeldin's campaign message. Zeldin repeatedly citing his own words to boost his campaign. The mayor and the governor, again, not really finding their footing to go around the city campaigning together until maybe the very end. So Democrats very clearly ran pretty bad campaigns, didn't have a lot of cohesion, and didn't take it seriously enough until the final weeks when polling started to show this could be an upset of the century for Lee Zeldin.
Right. The question of nationalizing the election. Trump was an albatross around the Republican Party neck across the vast majority of the country. And, Lee Zeldin was a Trump loyalist. And, it was like pulling teeth to get him to talk about Donald Trump. Was Trump a factor?
Look, I think Trump did, when he was president, I think he had really good policies. I think that with the economy, our foreign policy when Trump was president, his efforts in racial justice. I quite frankly think that if Trump was president, we wouldn't have a war in Ukraine. I think that right now, objectively speaking, we see that Trump candidates didn't do so well. I think that the candidates specifically...
What's the difference in New York, though?
So I think the candidates who specifically voted to overturn the election did poorly. And, that's not really my opinion. I think that's the facts on the ground. And, I think that's where we are.
Why was that not dispositive, as the lawyers say? Why was that not, determinative in what happened here? Because it seems to me that we had politics being local as opposed to nationalized, which is why the Republicans did well.
Well, I think it was definitely a factor. I don't think it was the only reason why, let's say, Congressman Zeldin lost, but I think it was a factor. And I think Governor Hochul did well in the messaging to say that, Congressman Zeldin is a Trumpist, he's an extremist, he's a MAGA, January 6er. I think that resonated with a lot of Democrats, even centrist Democrats, and I think they came out to vote against Trump, even though Trump wasn't on the ballot.
Does that make sense to you that what happened across the country, Trump was less relevant here?
He seemed to be. Even, the New Yorker or former New Yorker, I guess he's moved out of town.
Thank God. He is Florida and Ron DeSantis' problem.
But he's no longer here, but he certainly played less of an impact, it appears, even though I think Zeldin was an election denier. He did support Donald Trump. I think that connection would have been perhaps easier to make had Giuliani's son made it out of the primary, which he didn't. But he definitely played less of a factor in this race. And I think coming back to the New York Post for a minute, I think Ben's point is right. There was not only not engagement, but I think there were a couple of instances where she ran out of the back door to avoid being questioned by the New York Post. And as a former tabloid reporter, I can imagine...
Daily News and New York Newsday, not the New York Post.
That says something about what kind of a media outreach strategy you have if you're the governor of the state of New York running out of the back of the room citing security concerns because you don't want to get caught by the New York Post. It doesn't send a strong, I'm on it leadership position. And I think to the point of the mayor, which we talked about, Hochul saying, problems with crime in the MTA, that's on the mayor. Well, the mayor does have important control, but she's got a pretty big bullhorn last time I checked, and it just seemed like there was a leadership opportunity that she didn't take advantage of.
Well, and that's a good point. And so I want to say that Trump was a hindrance to the Republican Party, and we thank him for being that. And to your point, I never seen Trump address racial injustice. I just never seen him do that. But back to Hochul, I think, she was thrust into the spotlight. We know Andrew, and under Andrew, you're not doing much. Andrew is there, he's going to consume all the spotlight. So now you have Governor Hochul, she's thrust into the spotlight, she's in the seat. What do you do to galvanize this state and this city? It's a lot of work. And to your point, Ben, I didn't say that she did a poor job on the campaigning. She did $6 million on the ground, she had 11 field offices, 2 million absentee ballots went out. It was a slow start. She had a turtle race. But then when she seen the numbers starting to come down, they say, hey guys, we got to pick this thing up. What are we doing?
Eddie, let me take this to you, and I'm going to bring it to the city and ask Ina. You're going to go back to Albany, where the Democrats still have veto proof, I believe, at the right smack on the line of veto proof majorities in the Assembly and in the Senate. You have a Democratic governor. You have a Democratic
Mayor.
Attorney General. You have a Democratic state comptroller who outpolled everybody. Is all this Sturm und Drang about Republicans in the elections, is that a message that's going to affect what goes on up there?
I don't think so. If you look at Brooklyn, right, and you look at Queens, yeah, they had some pockets where they did excel. In Albany, we say, hey, we want to work with everybody. Let's listen to all. Of course, we're losing some big, great members up there. And then we have to work with the new members coming in, especially those from Brooklyn and Queens. And so I don't think it's going to be an issue. We have a great speaker in Carl Hasty. And our thing is, let's get some bills and
Well, no, but let me ask you specifically on the bail reform, if you will, to the degree that the Republican resurgence was centered generally around that issue. And the governor was decidedly cool to some of the more left side of the Democratic pressure. Is that a message that gets through? Or does leadership already fully understand that and factor it in?
We understand that, and when you talk about bail reform, a lot of voters are afraid. They think that we let people out of jail, we don't care about crime, let the city go down. It's a wrong perception. We do care. Do it needs tweaking? Certainly it does. Do criminal justice need rethinking? It does. It's a process.
Can I just add on that?
Yeah.
Go ahead, please, go ahead.
I just want to respond. You kind of keep saying it's a perception and it's the wrong messaging. Well, I mean, if the Democrats care, then why don't they just change the bail reform? Why don't they show the people, the voters, that they care by making a change? I don't think there has been any introspection in the Democratic Party, not from D.A. Bragg, who keeps, from on day one, he issued a memorandum basically letting criminals, do whatever they want, saying I'm gonna downgrade felonies, serious crimes to misdemeanors. And after the election, when Congressman Zeldin ran on, I'm going to fire D.A. Bragg on day one.
Which he could not do, by the way.
Which he could not do.
But he
all
did
false
phenomenally
narratives.
well, right, compared to other Republican candidates who ran. After that, the Democratic Party should have done some introspection, in my opinion, about what are they doing wrong with crime. And it hasn't happened because D.A. Bragg just doubled down.
Well, I knew for many years here in the city, being tough on crime equaled or meant being tough on black people. I don't know what happens in your district in Brooklyn, but black people proportionately get arrested in my community in large numbers. They couldn't defend themselves and they couldn't afford the bail. We had a young man from my district who died. He spent 3 years on Rikers Island because they said he stole a book bag. And he hung himself for stress because he couldn't afford the $1,500 bail. But yet you're criticized bail reform. There are thousands and thousands of African American and Hispanic men in prison who can't come out on a $1,000 bail.
And
65% of them are not guilty.
Well, nobody who's being held is guilty until they go
right.
through the system.
But yet you have these young men, families, broken families, single parent homes, welfare, can't afford attorneys, so they sit in these particular jail cells and they wait for this slow judicial system to say, hey, you're not guilty, you could go home now. So we have to create bail reform and make the system equal. I don't know how you're doing in Brooklyn, I don't know how you're doing in the Republican Party, but we care about folks of color, where we at.
Well, and I think that we need reform, and the criminal justice system is broken, and I agree with you that there are injustices that need to be dealt with. But when we let criminals out of jail and they go home before the cops go home, it actually hurts the black communities more because a lot of the crime is happening in those communities.
When the last time you've been in a black community?
And I have been,
When?
and I've
Tell me when.
in fact, I've been working with a lot of black Democrats who supported Congressman
I just asked you
Zeldin
when the last time you've been in a black community.
for that reason.
And if you working to talk to black Democrats that's working with Zeldin, you're not talking to Democrats.
Yeah, you were going to jump in.
Well, just a few quick things on this. One, I think important to note just about any time the bail reform discussion comes up is that the reforms that were made didn't deal with violent offenses, right? So
That's right.
Cash bail wasn't removed for violent offenses.
Thank you.
Secondly, the governor made changes to the bail law.
Yes.
She insisted on those changes. Going back to a prior point, she then didn't really talk about them. Now, there are questions about whether they've worked, whether they're meeting their intended purpose, but in the state budget in April, they passed changes to the bail law for the second time, much more significant changes than the first tweaks that were done under Governor Cuomo, and Governor Hochul spoke once or twice about them. I pushed these through. She said, I don't know that the judges and the courts are following those changes, a very big sort of light bulb moment that should have been followed up on, and then it sort of just vanishes from the discussion. So this to me goes back to, again, the kind of campaign that she ran where she seemed very hesitant to discuss these issues in any sort of full-throated way. And in the one debate against Zeldin, she talked about this, but it wasn't a consistent part of the campaign. Meanwhile, on his side, you had nothing but consistency talking about bail reform is broken, repeat offenders, so on and so forth. And the response just wasn't there. Again, there are questions about did those tweaks around repeat offenders, which was the central part of the changes she just got made, are they working? Are they being implemented? But she wasn't projecting the message that I got changes made and I'm going to make sure that they have a positive impact. She didn't even get Mayor Adams to acknowledge publicly, hey, some of the changes I want to the bail law were actually made in the state budget. So there's a significant challenge there again between what's the policy actually, is it being implemented, and is it being messaged? And all those pieces were amiss.
Which raises the questions, and raises the question. I'm going to start with you, Bradley. Is the staying power of the changes we saw? Is the Republican resurgence a one-shot, working off of, Lee Zeldin, who was, didn't have all that much money, but had a hell of a lot of money in independent expenditures from the likes of Ron Lauder, that were, if they were not coordinated, they were very close to being. I'm not suggesting that they were coordinated because that would be illegal. Is there staying power in these changes? There may be staying power. Is there staying power? Is this, as the political science would say, is this a realigning election?
Yeah, here's what I see as incumbent upon the Democratic Party and in particular the governor going forward. She, from what I can tell, is a pretty committed, moderate, middle-of-the-road, centrist Democrat.
She's definitely left of center. Right?
And left of center, but not far left.
Especially for Erie County, where she's from.
Absolutely. And I think what the mistake was on her part, as you talked about the rise and the resurgence of particularly the anti-Israel socialist wing of the party, small percentage but an awfully large bullhorn to talk to, is the Democratic Party seems to have taken a very strong leftward turn. And I think we saw examples of this coming out of Long Island last year in a lot of those races, where wokeism was on the ballot, where criminal justice reform was on the ballot, and we saw it again this year. So I guess we shouldn't be so surprised. We've seen this movie before, and I think the bail reform discussion took on legs of its own because she didn't have a strong centrist, I'm working for you kind of message. Long Island has turned virtually completely red. There was a third.
Yeah, but when Long Island is turns completely red after being majority blue, is that a one shot or is it more than that? I mean that's.
Well, I think you get at a very important point, which is on Long Island and elsewhere, which is there were elections over many election cycles where Democrats are just winning more and more and more seats to get
Westchester County is essentially a Democratic county now.
Yeah, and to get
sixth borough of New York.
In two election cycles, Democrats went from the minority in the state Senate to a supermajority. I mean, sort of these unbelievable gains. Again, likely in part thanks to Donald Trump, but that some sort of political correction was likely, including on Long Island, right? But then there were other factors that played into it, including things related to rising crime rates, bail reform,
or perception of rising crime rates that may not be there.
May not be on Long Island in particular. Sure.
and congestion pricing, which kept coming up.
Well, we
in the
haven't mentioned, right, and we
discussions,
haven't, I don't know that we've mentioned inflation. You might have ticked it off as one of the big
Right.
factors, but we haven't really talked about people are very upset about, I mean, it's very hard for all of us, to go to the grocery store and so
especially
forth.
if you drive and you
People
see
are
the
upset.
gas prices.
Democrats are in power, right? And so, yes, there were different factors happening in different places around the country, but the amount of concentrated Democratic power in New York, that's the place where there's going to be a backlash, right? I mean, if you're frustrated about things that maybe the governor can't really control, you still might blame the governor, right? Or whatever party that's part of. Then you get into some specifics about things that very much could be controlled, specific education policy and whatever.
Well, you made that point in your first remarks. You talked about how people voted against things that they perceived the Democrats to be representing, or voted against things that they were dissatisfied with, and the Democrats took the brunt of that negative vote. Is there a positive message?
Well, speaking of national politics, I think with the immigrants from the former Soviet Union, they came out to vote against communism and socialism because they see the Democratic Party moving towards communism. And, as an immigrant from the former Soviet Union, I can tell you that we escaped that. People moved mountains to move to another country for freedom, for opportunity, for the American dream, and they see the Democratic Party as a party that's moving towards socialism and communism and destroying.
Do you believe that that's a rational assessment of where the Democratic Party is moving?
I do. I think that, the more the Democratic Party moves to the left, the more consistent we're going to keep voting for Republicans.
The question is, I don't believe the Democratic Party has moved that far to the left. I think it did, over the last, over several election cycles. But, I look in particular the DSA, the Democratic Socialist of America, that can do well in very local elections where there's a lot of,
Local, yes.
a lot of, frankly, white gentrifiers who vote against gentrification. But when you look at Richie Torres's congressional district in the Bronx, where there was a strong DSA candidate who finished fourth, that when you get into broader electorates, when you look at the mayoral election, Eric Adams was not the left-wing candidate, and he came through ranked choice voting. It was not like first past the post. He had to come through. People had to put him on their ballots for him to rise up to first place. So I do think that the DSA has the bullhorn. I think you made the point.
Yeah.
But is there a difference between the bullhorn and the reality?
No, and that's certainly, and I disagree with the council member in regards to, but I do agree with her that voters are upset. Voters are tired of being tired. We're tired of seeing and hearing the same thing over and over. I often tell people in my community that we're tired of professional politics, right? We're tired of professional politicians. You need to be a peopletician in the city. And I think Democrats have to return to that. Caring about the people, yeah, we got the policies on lock, but let's talk to the people, let's take it back to the ground. To get across that messaging about we don't care about crime, we took a big hit on that one. And I need the governor to...
Good.
I think there can be debates about the degree of accuracy on some of these things, but I don't think it's disputable at this point that in Long Island, Southern Brooklyn, and some other pockets of the city and state that talk of sort of socialist revolution in New York, even though they mostly mean sort of Western European style democratic socialism, but talk about
social democracy.
Yeah, but talk about it's very loosely described, especially when it's in the insular sort of communities and political clubs and so forth that you're talking about. So talk of sort of socialist revolution, talk of defund the police, talk of some of these other things that are not necessarily that well explained, or maybe they're taken out of context. In certain places, those have just totally turned off a lot of moderate to conservative Democrats, independents, and that's exactly what's happening in some of these places to shift some of the margins. And I don't know, to go back to your question, I don't know that that's shifting back anytime soon, in terms of the political alignment. Now, to your other point that we've talked about a little bit, Democrats made up for some of the state Senate and Assembly losses in certain places by winning other seats. So in terms of the overall balance of power, maybe not, but some of these shifts look like they're at least going to stick around for a little while.
I
and
mean, it's Southern
we'll see in
Brooklyn.
next
I mean, if you look
city
at the
council.
assembly seats in southern Brooklyn, right? I mean, the candidates, well, one of the candidates was a former elected official, but the other, I mean, some of them have no
Krasny,
political
right.
experience, right? And we have Michael Novikov, who beat Simbrowitz, Assemblyman Simbrowitz, right? I mean,
But
in a landslide.
The next election is going to be a presidential election. And
Well,
when-
no,
and
there's
when-
a.
Well,
there's
no,
a-
I meant
there's
the
a
next,
city
the next
council.
state election. Yeah,
Right.
no, that's what I'm saying. Next year in the city council, I don't see these trends shifting. But the next state level election for all the legislative seats again, and the House seats will be a presidential election.
High turnout.
Democrats are likely to do better, but
Right.
again, in some of these districts, maybe they can win the seats back, maybe not. You know, that'll be things that Bradley and many others are looking at. But, you know, I think in terms of the ways that Democrats have lost some Asian American voters, some Latino voters, certainly Eastern European voters, I don't know that that's shifting back significantly. It's going to be a matter of turnout, which again, Republicans turned out immensely high in this election and Democrats did not.
Let's talk, if we can, about the Jewish community, in particular the Hasidic and the Orthodox community. I mean, significant groundswell of support for Zeldin there. And you have a segment, which may only be a handful of people in Washington, a handful of people in the council and in Albany, who are pretty decidedly anti-Israel. And that rhetoric is toxic to a lot of the voters that have typically been a part of the Democratic coalition. I don't see, in terms of forecasting, them deciding that they want to quiet down a little bit, be a little bit more reserved, and be a little more supportive of Israel. Certainly, given what's going on with the elections over there, I think it's harder with Netanyahu's right-wing coalition together to see that. But I see some of these trends continuing. There's an interesting analysis that was done in one of the congressional districts, the so-called Tom Suozzi seat,
Yeah.
Nassau and into the areas of Whitestone, where I think you grew up, northern Queens. The Democrats outvoted the Republicans in that Queens part of the district by 14,000 voters. 14,000 more Democrats came out than Republicans. And the congressional candidate, Robert Zimmerman, the Democrat, won that portion by 800 votes. That's a massive amount of defection around cultural issues, around economic issues, and I don't see that reversing itself immediately. It may in 2 years' time with a presidential election, but we're not going to win all those voters again. And I think these are worrying trends which, as a party nationally and even statewide, I don't see a lot of thoughtful conversations about what we need to do to meet those white ethnic voters where they are, whether they're immigrants or anything else. And I see that playing out even in some of the non-white communities as well. There were a lot of black voters that sat on their hands that were not mobilized. The preachers didn't know how to pronounce the governor's name.
I also
in
think you
Central
have-
Brooklyn. We have to engage voters. We have to go out and reach them. We have to mobilize them. Black voters not just a GOTV target 5 days before the election. And it's time for Democrats to learn some
I
of
also
those
think
lessons.
among Latino voters in particular that the least understood story is the rise of a conservative Pentecostal non-Catholic Latino cohort, which tends to be a much more certainly a much more culturally conservative, and that's been a very dramatic shift.
Well,
that people haven't accounted for, and it takes place in your district as well, I would assume.
Well, in my district, the Latino Hispanic votes, we're primarily and we're loyal to the Democratic Party. But if you look in Miami, if you look in Florida, Orlando,
Well, you look at the Bronx.
Well, the Bronx too. Yeah, you have a pocket in the Bronx who are, just frustrated with the system. But Democrats, I believe we have like a year of a window of opportunity to make this thing right. They get the messaging right, they get this back. Politics is going to be dormant for about a year or so. Though council is a very important race, people don't go crazy over it, right? So
Well, it should be a low turnout race, which would tend to support Republican resurgence. I mean, when you consider it's, a state where you have such a huge, and a city, such a mammoth Democratic advantage, and Republicans are motivated and Democrats are
Right. Yeah.
So,
I think you were going to finish a point.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
sorry.
No, please.
Go ahead.
Well, I was, you asked about sort of dynamics coming out of the election and also in Albany, and those will obviously relate to what happens in the state budget and legislative session. and then the next election in 2024 for the state legislative seats. Obviously, governor not up for 4 years. But I think there's two really interesting sort of competing trends to watch. It was very interesting that one of the governor's first post-election events was on Long Island, right? How much are state Democrats, led by the governor, trying to win back votes on Long Island versus...
They better.
Well, maybe. Versus this question where you get a lot more on the sort of progressive side of the equation saying Democrats didn't lean in hard enough to progressive solutions and then sell those. And that's a very big battle that's going to continue to play out. It's been playing out, obviously.
Well, that's the argument
this
that
was Andrew Cuomo's battle.
Bernie Sanders would have beaten Trump instead of Hillary Clinton. That's that argument, which I don't believe is true.
But this is already happening, right? You're seeing a lot of people more on the left of the Democratic Party saying we need to go back to Albany and we need to pass, these 6 bills to really lean into progressivism and then go and show people that we're doing that. And then you have more moderates like Governor Hochul likely, who is probably going to want to try to reappeal to those Long Island voters, Southern Brooklyn voters, and that is going to be a very interesting battle in Albany.
And though we won Nassau with 51% of the votes of Democrats. She still have to go to Nassau too. She have to make this whole tour and say, hey, look, guys, let's figure it out, but let's figure it out together. Closed room doors discussions are turning voters off, right? So we want to give it back to the voters, give it back to the people, and I think she have to make these tours.
Although
I'm an organizer by heart, so I'm saying you got to go to the street.
Although now 2 of the 3 men in the room are women in Albany, so it's a little...
Can I just quickly say, though,
About time.
To that point and what we've been making in, if Governor Hochul, Senator Schumer, Attorney General James, Comptroller DiNapoli, if they had
Speaker to be Hakeem Jeffries.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't see him doing a lot of campaigning either for New York Democrats. If they had all been aggressively campaigning throughout this election cycle, who knows what the results would have been? They barely did anything.
Yeah, they
she ran a lot of television ads. So,
but there was
And you
a
didn't see a single Kathy Hochul sign in New York.
Well, but you also, but when you face a wave, which I think is how you would have to describe, Staten Island moving east across southern Brooklyn. That people who point to organizational reasons why the Democrats didn't do well, you would have to have some massive organizational. I don't know
Sean
that the
Patrick
organizational
Maloney.
thing could offset the wave that we saw.
There were several narrow races that some real on-the-ground campaigning could have shifted the other way.
Maybe the Frontis race.
But congressional races, in the Hudson Valley especially, if Chuck Schumer and Sean Patrick Maloney had been going around his district campaigning for 2 months ahead of the election, maybe he is still in office. That had a lot of national implications.
He was in Europe.
But yes, exactly.
He was.
Forget even Schumer, right? Maloney wasn't taking it seriously for a lot of it. So, there's just a lot of these nuances that are also, I think, sometimes left out of the equation.
And Ben, I think what you put your finger on, I think, is a discussion about where does the Democratic Party go, more to the middle or get tugged to the left. And I think the challenge for the governor is going to be she's working off an awfully slim margin. The likes of which we haven't seen in 30 years. Cuomo would win by 20-something votes, 20 points rather. Spitzer had huge working mandate majorities, and she's barely squeaked over the finish line.
I don't know but she's there for 4 years, and the state legislature. I'm not sure I agree with you because the. Once you're in, you're in.
How much of a mandate does the legislature think she have, and do they force her hand?
You made the point about, I made the point about veto-proof majorities. It could be that the worst thing for her to have was a veto-proof majority because.
I tend to think the assembly member would know better, but I tend to think veto-proof majority or not doesn't really matter.
I agree
much.
with you. I agree.
Carl Hastie and Andrew Stewart Cousins do not want to be overriding lots of Hochul vetoes. They might do it on a few bills, like some of the ones she just vetoed that relate to task forces and stuff like that. Not this month in December, but in the future maybe. But you're not going to see, I don't think, big wars there. And I don't know that other than some of those really further left progressives, I don't think that there's very many people who came out of this election saying, we as Democrats need to go further left in New York. I just don't know that I see that.
That's a very important point. Do you agree with that? that Democrats.
But she got about, I think, 280,000 votes from the Working Families Party.
Yeah, but Zeldin got all those votes on the Conservative Party.
Actually, a
So, I
little
mean,
more.
right. So
But
that's
this is
But
a
the
key point.
question is she now kind of beholden to them? Because I think they
She's
actually
beholden
put
to
her over the
anybody.
top.
Oh,
is she beholden for anybody for the next 3 years until she's running
But
for
this is
re-election?
Councilmember Vernikov is making a great point, which is that I think the Working Families Party, again, some people on the left are going to expect Governor Hochul and others to lean in further to some of what they want, because they do think that they saved her in the end with turnout. They were trying to save their own ballot line too, but
Yeah, but
Which
I
I
still.
think
that's
why
a
we're having
key-
this
a key
conversation
point.
about whether the Democratic Party is moving to the left. Like, I agree with all of you that Kathy Hochul is a centrist, but the question is, are the progressives going to move her to the left?
Yeah, but it's like I used to have this discussion with Mike Long, that recently passed away. A really wonderful
Hey,
man,
Mike.
who was the head of the Conservative Party, and it's hard for me to imagine that somebody who voted for Kathy Hochul on the Working Families Party line, or somebody who voted for Lee Zeldin on the Conservative Party line, wouldn't have voted for them in the Democratic and Republican if those two parties didn't exist. So I'm still not convinced, other than their power. The only way their ballot line becomes important is that they threaten to nominate somebody other than the person that the major parties did, which last happened, I think, with Pierre Rinfret and Herb London in 1990, or maybe 1980.
Governor
I
Hochul's
can't
not going to
remember.
raise taxes. I mean, I could be wrong, but she's not going back to Albany looking to raise taxes to then spend that money on other things. Now, if there's a real crisis with the MTA and they really need to figure out some more money, maybe there's a chance they tick up the multimillionaire, surcharge tax for a couple more years or something like that. But she doesn't want to raise more taxes further. You could go down the list of policies. There's going to be some, like on some housing policy, that are going to be big debates, and we don't have time to go into those specifics. But we're not going to see Kathy Hochul go back to Albany and all of a sudden become a left-wing politician, right? It is a matter of where the legislature tries to take things.
I don't think she would do that. I think she'll just come in. She's going to be Kathy Hochul. She have a point to prove, and I think she's going to do just that. So I'm not focusing on what she's going to do the next 4 years. I know she's going to do a phenomenal job. But what I'm focusing on, Bob, is Jay Jacobs. He has his hand cut out for him. He has a lot of work to do.
Jay Jacobs is the state Democratic Party who's come under tremendous attack.
We
in the
have to
aftermath of the
restructure
elections.
this, right? And it starts with Jay. We have to be supportive. I think he did a great job with what they gave him, but we have to do more, and we have to figure this thing out, and we want this to work in the next 2 to 4 years.
And that's probably a healthy process for the party to go through. I don't see any downside of that.
None at all.
Do you, if you don't mind me
Please.
asking a question, do you think a more moderate Republican would have won? There's debate over that, right? Lee Zeldin fired up the Republican base in such a way, but he was he's got an anti-abortion pass. He put out this incredible ad saying, "I won't touch the abortion law," to try to undercut that. But he's anti-abortion record, obviously close ties to Trump. Some people say, well, a more moderate Republican would have actually
Harry
won.
Wilson have won?
Would have
Harry
actually won this
Wilson have
election.
won?
Some people say, no way, he wouldn't have been able to turn out the base. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I think no one can really say with certainty what would have happened, right? I think he ran a great campaign. He was a great candidate. He went to speak to the voters directly. He went everywhere, all over New York. And
He didn't spend as much time upstate as Republicans traditionally do, though, which is very interesting.
And I think we expected him to do a little better
Yeah.
in those areas. But look, I think there were several factors that, of course, we can't deny. We have to be honest of what we have on the ground, right? I mean, I think the abortion issue didn't impact voters as much as Kathy Hochul expected, but I think that some people didn't understand that as governor, he wouldn't be able to change the law in New York. I think that Trump did have an effect on some voters, and I remain, I stand by what I said before. I think that it did have an impact. I think some people in the last minute, people like Mark Levine got people out to vote, got them scared. This is a Trump candidate, and people got scared and came out to vote against Trump, even though Trump wasn't on the ballot. So I think all these things definitely had an effect on voter turnout, and I think also with independents. I think it was, at the end of the day, I think they went with Governor Hochul.
We have go ahead. We have a minute and a half left.
And also want to talk to Ben about the Maloney piece. So, with Sean Patrick Maloney, and though, it seemed like he was so absent out there in Hudson, Mike Lawler, for whatever reason, his messaging resonated with the folks out there in Hudson. They were afraid of crime. They were afraid of people coming into their town and destroying their town. And so Mike Lawler...
Mike Lawler is the person who beat Sean Maloney.
Sean Patrick Maloney, yeah. So his messaging was pretty much consistent. Like, hey, look. And he had these little cute sound bites from Sean Patrick Maloney and say, hey, look, I didn't. So it worked in messaging. And I think Sean Patrick Maloney didn't give enough response or enough on-ground time to win that seat.
Yeah, I mean, I think that race also goes to the questions for Democrats in a lot of races, which was sort of selling the accomplishments, right? Trying to put the positive spin on things, the massive number of bills and such that have come through the Congress with Democrats controlling both houses and a Democrat
Even
in
with
the White
only a
House.
50-50 Senate.
Well, but yes, but part of the issue is a lot of that, the infrastructure spending, for example, people haven't seen that yet in the communities. But what candidates need to be able to do, right, is sell that, hey, we've got this done and it's coming, and you just didn't see that.
Silence.
Yeah.
We've got 20 seconds left. I'm going to give you the last word. Again, is this a realigning election? Is this a one-off?
There's somewhere in between, Bob, somewhere in between. I think we're going to see some of these trends stay around. Realignment is a big word.
Another big word is it's time for me to go. I always make deadline. Thank you all. We'll see you next time on CUNY Forum. Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Bob.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.